I am aware that I am filming this a month late, but better late than never is what procrastinators always say. Hi, my name is Trish, and in this video I will be talking about my favorite books of 2018. First of all, please ignore my earphone dangling so beautifully off my ear. It's noisy outside and this is the only way that I can film without any of those interference. It's a janky way to record, I know, but I do not have the money to invest in some good things right now. So all of you are just gonna have to deal with this. This list was curated based on my own experiences reading these books, so some of them might not necessarily fall into the good literature category. Whoever gets to decide that. Also, this list is not in order. I do not have the mental capacity to choose between my children. The first book on my list is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This follows the now retired Hercule Poirot as he investigates the murder of one of the prominent people in the town he is currently residing in. The story is narrated by the town doctor who assists Poirot in his investigation, so it has this Sherlock Watson vibe to it, only Watson is more cynical of Sherlock's abilities. The thing about mysteries is that no matter how confused you are about the situation or who the killer is, you're almost always certain that the narrator is someone you can trust. In the process of elimination, the narrator is always the first one to go, because what's a mystery if you have an unreliable narrator, right? Wrong. Agatha Christie doesn't give a fuck about your trust. If screwing with your head is what it takes to write a good story, she will do it. And boy, did she do it. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that this is Agatha Christie's magnum opus. It demonstrates to a great extent how masterful she is with her writing and how good she is at being a liar. I was amazed at how smoothly Agatha Christie misdirected me throughout the whole book. There was not one moment where I was sure who the killer really was, which isn't really saying that much about me because my deductive skills are shit and my criminology background is basically watching Criminal Minds and CSI. The next books on my list are The Wrath and the Dawn duology by Renee Ahdieh. This is a retelling of 1001 Nights, only it focuses more on the romance and all the other elements that make up a generic YA fantasy. Passive-aggressive insult aside, I really enjoyed reading these books. I read it during my romantic phase earlier in the year, last year, and it delivered all the sweet angsty moments that my trash heart was looking for. The Wrath and Dawn follows Shazi, who volunteers to be the next bride to the Sultan Khalid. She plans to avenge the death of her best friend who was Khalid's bride before her, but as she spends time with the Sultan, she discovers this curse that forces him to execute his brides, and she is eventually torn between her allegiance to her friends and her family and to the Sultan whom she is learning to love. So the pace of these books are actually quite fast, so the entertainment value is check. Unfortunately, this did not leave a lot of room for the author to add to the lore of the story or to develop the characters. The characters themselves are endearing, two-dimensional but endearing. Shazi was snarky and sassy and sassy. Shazi was sassy. Oh my god. Shazi was snarky and sassy and a fun protagonist to root for. Yes, that's what I was trying to say. And Khalid, well, for the most part, he was the stereotypical moody, brooding, handsome male love interest. He was sweet. But what I really liked about the duology is the camaraderie between the characters. I loved how the girls had each other's backs and were building each other up, and I also liked the complexity of Tariq and Khalid's eventual friendship, if you can call it that, because they basically just decided not to kill each other. So overall, although it did lend itself as somewhat generic, The Wrath and Dawn has its own charm, and I really enjoyed reading it. The next books on my list are And I Darken and Now I Rise by Kirsten White. These are the first two books in the Conqueror saga. This is a gender-bent retelling of the life of Vlad Tepes. In these books, he is personified through the character Lada, who along with her brother Radu is taken to the Turkish Empire as hostages. Or at least, I think it's the Turkish Empire. Together, they must maneuver through the political ploys of the court as well as each other because they both have different dreams and ambitions. Lada wants to go back to Wallachia and rule it as an independent state, while Radu wants to integrate himself into the very empire that his sister sees as enemies. Now, these books are not for the fucking weak. If you plan to pick this up, make sure that you have the mental and emotional stamina for it, because I sure fucking didn't, and I had to stop in the middle of reading these books because I was having an emotional breakdown. The first thing I'd like to note about these books is that they are long and considerably slow. The story deals with a lot of dynamics and manipulation between many people and parties, so the plot had to cater to that. There are more scenes dedicated to plotting and scheming and overall world building than there is about battles and warfare and all that juicy drama. Personally, this did not bother me because by taking the time to set everyone and everything in place, Kirsten White was able to create this immersive world with well-developed characters, and it really added to the value of the story. The second thing I'd like to note about this book is how it presents its characters. Almost everyone in this saga, if not everyone, is morally gray, and I think it's a fairly realistic representation of characters that are in the middle of a political and actual war. There is not one concrete villain or hero in these books because every character is a hero to themselves and a villain to others. These books also carry heavy themes, especially about the consequences of war, and I liked how the author did not shy away from showing a perspective from each side. By doing this, it was harder to pick a side and to root for just one character because you end up sympathizing and understanding with all the parties involved in this emotional shit show. So despite the great deal of emotional stress that these books have given me, I really liked it. Everything was just on point. The characters, the world building, the pace of the plot, the story, it just all meshed so well together that it was a really good read. It was worth all those emotional trauma. The next book on my list is One Dark Throne by Kendra Blake. If you followed my book blog in Tumblr, now deceased, you will know that I detested Three Dark Crowns. It was cliche, it was generic, it was cheesy, it was just awful. And I don't know why I decided to continue with the series. Oh wait, I do know. Look at these covers. They're a family of good-looking covers. I am always a slut for aesthetically pleasing books. So One Dark Throne picks up from where the previous book ended. It follows the three queens as Battle Royale season starts. So Arsenault is dealing with the monumental plot twist about herself. Mirabella is angsty because she thinks Arsenault sent a bear to maul her to death. And Catherine is possessed by the spirits of vengeful dead queens. So far things are normal at Fenburn. What I really appreciated about this book is that it focused on the things that mattered. Everything that I hated about the previous book was blessedly absent. This book focused more on the dynamics between the three queens and the power play between the two families in position. The three queens have great development in this book, and it fit in so smoothly with how the plot unfolded. So there's this nice balance between substance and entertainment. There's also a spike in healthy relationships in this book, and sweet baby Jesus, they are not romantic relationships. I wish YA books had more warm platonic relationships in them. No, Arsenault and Julian's friendship will always be at the top of my list, but Mirabella and Billy's relationship is a very close second. I'm so glad that the characters weren't pushed into a love triangle with other characters, but instead the author decided to focus on building more reasonable and healthier relationships, which really added to the development of the plot and the story. There are a lot of memorable scenes in this book, but my favorite scene was during the Queen's Hunt, aka Battle Royale Round 1. So Catherine and Mirabella had this whole squad with them to back them up, but my poor baby Arsenault had no one, and she was panicking. And in the last minute, Luke's come running after her, offering his support and his help. Luke and his rooster hang, and his complete love and loyalty and confidence in Arsenault is just so overwhelming that it overshadows the fact that he and his rooster are practically useless in battle. We love a supportive friend and his rooster. That was not an innuendo. The next book on my list is See You in the Cosmos by Jack Cheng. This follows an 11-year-old boy and his dog as they go to this rocket festival in the desert so that he can launch his golden iPod into space like his hero Carl Sagan. Along the way, they meet people and things happen, and this road trip becomes an adventure to find this boy's father, which eventually leads to him finding out the truth about his family. Now, I know it sounds lighthearted and fun because there's a little boy and a dog involved, but it's actually a very sad and moving story, which makes it all the worse that there's a little boy and a dog involved. Little children and animals are a lethal combination to my emotional stability. And to make matters worse, this story is actually narrated through the eyes of that little boy. So as the plot unfolds, he records it into his golden iPod. This kind of narrative lends a new perspective on situations that would be handled differently if the protagonist were older. A lot of heavy and sensitive themes in this book were actually brought up through the inquiries of a little boy. Themes like mental illness and family issues, neglect, abandonment, and even failure. And the way the book handles these topics is done with such honesty and sincerity that it's very moving and jarring even to face such complex issues with the sincerity of a child. In short, I was wrecked. Just to give you all a taste of how emotional this book is, let me read a short passage from page 16. One time Benji asked me, "Do I feel bad about not having a dad?" And I asked him, "Do you feel bad about not having a dinosaur?" Benji said, "He's not sure because he's never had one." And I said, "I feel the same way about a dad." That's just page fucking 16. The next book on my list is Circe by Madeline Miller. It is a retelling of Circe's life told through her side of the story. It details her childhood, her exile, having her son, and every other significant event in her life where her narrative was not taken into account. And that is what I really loved about this book. This was not a redemption story for Circe. In fact, the book stayed faithful to its source about what Circe has done. But what this book did, and did so wonderfully, was create circumstances and motivations behind Circe's actions. From this cold and intimidating figure in Greek mythology, Circe transformed into a woman fighting for her freedom to be herself and to live her life by her own volition. And in this sense, she lends herself to be the everyday woman. Madeline Miller is a very masterful writer. She has a way of expressing the deepest of emotions through the simplest of thoughts, and this really helped me in making a connection with Circe because she knew exactly what to say for me to understand the gravity of what was going on and what Circe was going through. Ironically, I will never be able to articulate how articulate Madeline Miller is. Circe is relatable to a personal level. Madeline Miller just crafted her character into this sincerely human person, and it's funny how in all my years of reading I never related to a human protagonist as much as I related to a demigod, which only shows how well Madeline Miller was able to develop Circe's story. The next book on my list is The Winner's Curse trilogy by Marie Rutkowski. This is a YA romance set in the backdrop of a war. It follows Kestrel, a Valorian noble, and Aaron, a Harani slave, as they try to survive the war between their people while gradually falling in love. I know it sounds like a tropey, cliche YA story, but trust this bitch when I say that it's anything but. I personally found The Winner's Curse well-rounded. It had romance, family drama, friendship drama, warfare, intense plotting, and moral issues. But most of all, what I really appreciated about this series was that it didn't treat the romance like it was the only fucking thing happening in the entire series. I liked how Aaron and Kestrel's relationship was integral to the story, but wasn't its main focus. Aaron and Kestrel's romance hinged on more important elements of the story like the war and their families, instead of everything else adjusting to cater to their romance, which unfortunately is what a lot of YA books tend to do. I also appreciated how the author addressed the Harani's slavery and the racism against them. With all the things happening in this series, I really liked that its focal point really stayed on that topic, the mistreatment of the Harani, and this was challenged mostly through Kestrel's narrative, and I liked how it wasn't just addressed through dialogue like, oh no, this is bad, slavery is bad, racism is bad, but the author actually created scenarios where Kestrel was put in that spot where she herself witnessed the mistreatment of the Harani and she fully realized that she and her people were in the wrong. So this cognitive dissonance battle with herself was actually a critical part of Kestrel's development because she knows that her and her people are in the wrong, but at the same time she is expected to serve her country. So I really like that the author took the time and thought to challenge this issue. The next books on my list are Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Listen, everyone and their mother loved this duology. Leigh Bardugo did not need to do any marketing for these books because the readers were doing it themselves. And if there was ever a time that advertisement did not fail me, it's this. So the duology follows this group of young, criminally inclined outcasts. They are hired to do this impossible heist, and eventually they are betrayed and are pursued by adversaries from all sides. So now they have to fight their way through this Sodom and Gomorrah-esque city while dealing with their own personal demons and of course each other. Basically, it's Ocean's 11 meets Teen Titans. I'm not going to delve too much into these books because in this short span of time I will not be able to give them justice. I do plan to film a different review for this just so that I can gush about these precious babies. But what I can say about this duology is that it is on point. Everything is on point. The entertainment value is, the world building is amazing, the characters are well developed, the plot is masterfully done, and the story just fucked me up good. This book gave me just as much pain as it gave me happiness, and to be honest, I will let it hurt me over and over again. And last but not the least is Every Heart a Doorway and Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shannon McGuire. If you cannot tell by my weirdly big smile, this is my favorite read of 2018. These are the first two books in the Wayward Children series, and the premise of the whole series goes like this. Basically, children are able to find these magic doors that lead them to fantasy worlds, and there's an infinite number of these fantasy worlds, and they spend a certain amount of time there, and due to some unfortunate circumstances, they find their way back here into the real world, which is a bummer for them because apparently each of these worlds that they enter into is actually this sort of perfect place for them. First book follows Nancy, who has found her way back into the real world even though she didn't want to, and she is finding it hard to cope with reality. So she is sent to Eleanor West's school for wayward children, where other kids like her are sent to rehabilitate. Things take a fun turn when some of her fellow students turn up dead, and the killer might be among them. The second book is actually a sequel to the first book. It follows Jack and Jill. I'm not making these names up, I promise. It follows Jack and Jill, two of the characters from the first book, and it details their childhood, how they found their door, the years they spent in their fantasy world, and how they eventually stumbled back into the real world, which leads up to the events of the first book. Shannon McGuire is an exceptionally talented writer. She has this way of developing a world and its lore and developing characters in such short amount of time and sentences and pages. The Wayward Children series is just such an ingenious series, and because I will never be able to articulate my feelings for these books, all I can say is that these books are magic in itself. On point, Trish, on point. That's it for my favorite books of 2018. I hope you weren't too bothered by my friend here. Till the next video.